episode 190 of Board Game Blitz, a podcast about all things board games that you can listen to in less time than it takes to troubleshoot why all of your equipment is suddenly not working in the middle of a live stream. Speaking of which, we're streaming this recording session live on our Twitch channel, so you may hear us chatting with our viewers throughout the episode. Board Game Blitz is sponsored by Grey Fox Games. This week, we're talking about games that don't get talked about enough. First, we discuss a couple games we played recently, My First Adventure, Journey to Ochre Land and Discovering Atlantis, and Okanagan, Valley of the Lakes. Then, we talk about games that we love but nobody else is talking about. And now, here are your hosts,
Ambie
and Crystal.
Recently, I haven't played that many new games, but I got a couple of new game books for my kids in the My First Adventure series. So I got My First Adventure, Journey to Ochre Land, and My First Adventure, Discovering Atlantis. I'm not sure if I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I've talked about it in lots of YouTube videos. My First Adventure, Finding the Dragon, was the first one in the series, and it's a choose-your-own-adventure role-playing book for kids, like as young as toddlers. My kids really love it. I'll link the YouTube overview video that I have of it in the show notes, but the Finding the Dragon one, which is the only one available in the US, is like they've read it so many times. It's all beat up, falling apart, and they still like it. So I've been wanting to get other ones in the series because I think originally they were in French, and then there's some in the UK that have been translated, but like they haven't been brought over to the US. And so I got tired of waiting because I'm not sure if they ever will be brought over to the US. And I was able to order a couple of these off of Zatu Games, Z-A-T-U Games, which is
I've used that site before to order stuff from overseas. Yeah. That's a decent site if you want to get games from Europe that aren't coming to the States.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that in case you're like me and want to get something that's in the UK that's not in the States, but they shipped to the US. So I was like, ooh, and I also got some jigsaw puzzles that aren't in the US either. So I got the My First Adventure, Journey to Ochre Land and Discovering Atlantis, which are the two ones they have, and gave it to my kids as early birthday presents because they found out what was in the box and then were like, oh, let's open it. I want to read it now. I was planning on giving it to them for their birthday, but oh well. Yeah, so now we've read it like 6 times each or something because we keep reading them for their bedtime stories. So the way these books work, they're all similar. They're a choose your own adventure, and it has 3 flaps on each page, kind of like I had like little book toy art of dinosaurs or animals before that had like the head, the body, and the tail as different sections, and then you flip through it and make your own little jumbled dinosaur animal. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was like 3 sections you flip through. So it looks kind of like that on each page. So there's a page, it tells you something that happens, and then you flip through and you choose one of 3 choices. And so it's like, do you want to do this, this, or this? And then you flip the pages depending on what you pick. And then there are these wheels that give you different items. So if you do something, you might get an item or you might not. And so you turn the wheel, there's different colored wheels to the item. Later on in the book, there's like 6 whole page choices. So like a big page and then the choices of each page. So there's the first 3 where you can have the option of getting 3 items, so you can get them or not. The second half of the book, there's the pages that can use the items. So it's like the 3 choices are like things that are the different items that you could have gotten. It's like if you got a light in one of the things and something else is, oh, do you want to like use a light to do something? And so if you pick that and you don't have the item, then you get hurt or you don't get the good thing. But if you do have the item, then you get the good thing. And like getting 3 of the good thing or not getting hurt at all lets you win. You get the happy ending, and otherwise you get a less happy ending. So like all of these work the same way. They just have different stories. Finding the Dragon is about finding a dragon and befriending it. Journey to Ochre Land is about you're going through a valley and trying to solve a drought. And so you're like finding different spirits to help you get water back. And then Discovering Atlantis is about you're discovering Atlantis and trying to find treasure. In Finding the Dragon and Journey to Ochre Land, you actually play as characters. But in Discovering Atlantis, you're a submarine. So like you get to choose also one of 3 characters to be, and they have different abilities. And so in Atlantis, it's kind of weird because you're a submarine, and then instead of getting items, you're upgrading your submarine. Sometimes like the choices don't make much sense, but my kids still like it. And making the choices. And I guess so far they've read both of them the same amount, so I'm not sure which they like better. They haven't read Finding the Dragon since getting these new ones because I think they like new things and they get excited about that. But they do like both of it, and I think they just like the system in general. I think personally I like Finding the Dragon the best. I still haven't read all of them of these two, but Journey to Ochre Land there were some typos in it, I think. One of them, it said the white disc instead of the blue disc. And some of the wording was kind of weird. I think also one of them had a bad word in it. I'm not sure which one it was. So I just skipped over that when I was reading it to my kids because they can't read yet. And then Discovering Atlantis might be a little scary because it's darker and there's a big kraken. So I don't know. I mean, my kids aren't scared by it. My kids are weird. They...
I mean, yes, one of your boys is obsessed with skeletons.
Yeah, he likes traditionally scary things, so. And I did hear from some other parents that their kids got scared by the Finding the Dragon one, and that one's like, because the dragon does scary things, because they like wake up and breathe fire, but then you block it. So I think Journey to Ochre Land might be the least scary of the three. But overall, they're not super scary stories. And so I really like the system, and my kids really like it too. They like picking the choices, and you can use them for as kids that can't read, or even if they can't talk, they can point to things if they understand what you're saying, and you say like, oh, which one do you want, this or this, and they can point to it. So very young kids can play / read through these stories. So yeah, I really like My First Adventure series for kids, and if you want the other ones, you can get them off Zatu Games or some other place that ships to the US. Or if you live not in the US, if you lived in the UK or somewhere, you can get those easier.
Well, those sound pretty cool, and if I had, young kiddos in my life, I mean, how old do you think, in your estimation, obviously this is personal opinion, and all kids are different, so all that taken into account, what would you say thereabouts is like the top end of the age range for these books?
I'm not sure, but like people have said their kids who are like 8 still love it. So maybe like 9 or 10. I don't know.
Well, shoot. Maybe I should get them for my nephews then, because maybe they would both really enjoy them. Yeah.
So I don't know. I like looking, I like looking through it, but then like the replayability isn't as high for me. But I still want to see like all the endings, because that's what I do with Choose Your Own Adventure things. But I still haven't seen all the endings of these new ones yet. But like once I do that, then I get kind of tired of it. But yeah, my kids just do the same thing over and over again, and they're fine with that. So as people get older, they get more tired of that. But I'm not sure at what age kids get tired of it.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to hear about them.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all have heard me talk about my friend Kathy a whole bunch. She is one of my besties and one of my favorite people to play board games with. And she recently brought a game over to my house that I had never heard of before. It apparently came out around 6 or 7 years ago. And I don't know how big of a splash it made when it was published, but it flew under my radar apparently. And that is called Okanagan, Valley of the Lakes. And I'm going to preface this review by saying I'm going to review the game first, and then I'm going to go on a rant after I review the game that is not related to the gameplay at all, but is, I think, something important to discuss in relation to this game and the publishing of board games in general. So I'm going to hold that till the end. I'm just going to talk about the gameplay first, and then we'll get into the rant later. So, Okanagan, Valley of the Lakes is published by Matago, designed by Emmanuel Ornella. Truthfully, if you were to see this on a table, it very much resembles Carcassone. And it was, as the designer has admitted, partially inspired by Carcassone. Also inspired by Walnut Grove, which is a game I have not played, so I can't really make any direct comparisons there. But it is a tile-laying game where instead of meeples like you do in Carcassone, you have structures, and on your turn you lay out a tile, and then you must place a structure onto that tile. And similar to Carcassone, you can place it into different areas of the tile. But the way this game works is you're placing it either solely in a single area, or in between 2 areas, or in the crux of multiple areas. And the different structures are worth varying amounts of influence. I don't remember, influence is probably the wrong word, but basically more power some of them are worth. And anytime via the placement of a tile, an area is completely closed off, which again, a concept concept familiar to those of you who know Carcassone, then that area will score. All of the areas on these tiles have little icons in them, and those icons are things like, well, they're called reward tokens, but they have resources on them like fish or fruit or wood or stone, and there are also little explorers on some of them as well. And so whatever tokens are available in the closed off land space get divvied up between the people who have influence in that area. Whoever has the most influence gets to pick first. Whoever has the least influence actually gets to take a bonus tile from outside of the board that will give them a special ability. And then they may get some tokens as well, but the way the things get divvied up is kind of variable, so I'm not going to get into that too strongly. But basically, both of the players have objective cards that they're working toward, as well as some public objectives. So you're trying to collect all of these tokens. It's set collection. You're trying to make certain sets of certain types of tokens by the end of the game. And you're also collecting gold nugget cards, which are going to be worth points on their own. It's a relatively simple game mechanically. It's kind of like Carcassone, slightly more to it, I guess. Although with Carcassone's expansions, you can make it more difficult as well. But this is definitely a step up from base game Carcassone. I was reading in the Twitch chat, thankfully Andrea, who is a Canadian, is fixing my pronunciation. It is Okanagan. Getting back to the game, it is fun. I really enjoyed it. I like tile laying games. It's one of my favorite kind of genres of games in general. I've only played it at 2 players, but I can definitely see how it would scale well to more players. It's fun. If you like games like Carcassone, it's pretty easy to pick this one up and get it played. And it seems widely available like on a third-party market. Pretty cheap too. So if that interests you, maybe look up a copy. But I do want to say, so here comes the rant. When I saw that this was based in Canada, I wanted to do a little bit of research. It did not bode well for me that when I looked at the Board Game Geek's description of this game, the very first sentence, or 2 sentences of the description by the publisher say, "Canada's wealth is waiting for you. The Okanagan Valley, with its huge lakes and fertile meadows, awaits anyone willing to exploit it." Like, if we're talking about theme in a board game, that's not a way to endear yourself to me by, like, let's exploit the beauty of Canada. So I did a little bit of research about the Okanagan Valley, and apparently it is a beautiful region that a lot of, similarly to a lot of other native lands in Canada and in the United States, was eventually, people moved in from outside of the native population to make some changes. And that included, so in 1859, there was a European settlement that was established there by Father Charles Pandosy, and he put an oblate mission there at Okanagan Mission. The reason I'm saying all of this is because I, within the past couple of years, was made aware of the pretty horrible stuff that has happened to Native Americans in Canada over the years as a result of residential schools. Being an American, I had no idea about any of this. Residential schools are a thing that was led by the Oblates, the church in Canada, and Native populations were forced to send their children to these schools, and a lot of really, really horrific things happened at those schools, things which I'm not going to mention by name because I would need to give a whole bunch of content warnings. So if you can imagine the church and horrible things happening, you're probably thinking in the right direction. The fact that we still have board game publishers who are making games about beautiful regions like this, and I'm not saying that those things specifically happened in the Okanagan region. They may have, I don't know specifically, but I do know they've happened in many other regions in Canada. And I'm really tired of European board game publishers talking about areas of the world in which they don't have knowledge and they are not being respectful of those areas' history. And literally in the description, it's saying, let's exploit this land. To me, that's dismissive and potentially hurtful, and it just could be handled better. Even a note, I looked through the entire rulebook. There is nothing, like even just a note about the history of anything would have been helpful. So, all of that to say, here's the spin to make this all good for y'all. There is a podcast that I would highly recommend if you want to learn more about the history of what has happened in Canada. Look up the Spotify original podcast Stolen: Surviving St. Michael's. Content warning, lots of very heavy topics discussed in that podcast, but it is hosted by a woman who is looking into her father and her family's past and learns a lot of really, really troubling things, but also it's kind of a journey of healing for her and her family. And I learned a lot of things about Canada's history that I was unaware of previously. So I've taken this bad thing that made me feel icky today, and I'm trying to spin it on let's educate ourselves and learn some stuff, because I tend to not know a lot of history about countries outside of the United States, and so I think it's important to mention those kinds of things when I have the opportunity. So that was my rant. Matago, do better, please.
But I'm glad it got you looking up history and stuff. That's cool.
Right? Like, yes, absolutely. So we actually asked our Ko-fi supporters what topics they wanted to hear us talk about, and I believe in the Twitch chat right now, Scott is the one who suggested the one that we're talking about tonight. It is a topic we've touched on before, but it's been a little while, so we figured this would be a good one to bring back up, and that is games that don't get talked about enough, at least from our point of view. Obviously, Ambie and I are just two people, and so if we think something's not being talked about, that just means we haven't heard people talking about it. For all we know, technically a whole bunch of people could be talking about it and we just haven't heard them. So, obviously take things with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And also, I guess this is a good disclaimer too. I'm going to talk about games that I've definitely talked about before. So
yes, we don't count ourselves as people.
Yeah, we don't count ourselves. So you're going to hear me talk about the games that I've talked about before that no one else talks about, because I'm the only one talking about them, in my world at least.
Yeah, and for me, like, that's part of why I talk about the games, is because I don't hear other people talking about it. Like, I've made a lot of content specifically because I haven't seen other content, like, making it. Like, when I started doing free print and play games, or like coverage of print and play games, well, free ones because I'm cheap, but like just print and play in general, because like I don't see that many people talking about print and play games, and there's so many, and it's like I didn't know these existed. And I was just like clicking through them, related stuff on BGG, and I'm like, wow, there's so much. Why haven't I heard of it?
Yeah. I actually added one. I don't do print and play games typically, mostly because I don't own a printer, so it'd be really
that makes it hard
to do print and play games. But somebody tweeted or posted on one of the other social media channels, I can't keep them all straight now, on BGG like this past week, and I actually added it to my want to play list because I wanted to tell you about it. Literally, I put it on my list just so I could make sure that you were aware of it. So the game was Utopia Engine, which came out in 2010. Have you played this one, Ambie?
Yes, that's one of the first ones I played, actually. It's
I figured you'd probably played it because it's one of the best, apparently, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it was good. So a lot of the print and plays are roll and writes, and I'm not like a big fan of roll and write games, and this one's also roll and write, but it was like more adventure-y too, so it was a pretty long game. So I haven't played it since like the first couple of times I played. But there's also an expansion that I printed out that looks similar called Utopia Engine Beast Hunter, and I haven't played that one yet. Okay. Oh, apparently I have a review for it on BGG.
Apparently?
Oh, the video, because I have an overview of it, yeah.
Oh, nice. To be fair, we don't, literally, we don't remember what we podcasted about a month ago, so, it's funny, when I used to consume board game content, before I was a content creator, I would hear content creators say things that they had already said, almost verbatim, word for word, in different episodes. And I would be like, they've already said that. Why are they repeating themselves? And now I get it. You don't have any idea what you've said before. I don't know how, your brain disassociates or something.
And we're probably going to repeat what we said in our earlier overlooked games episode too.
Very much so.
Well, I remember like saying some stuff because as I was saying, like I talk about games because I think they haven't been talked about. And that's like what I did with 18xx games. But now I think those are being talked about more. So they're no longer in this category of games that don't get talked about enough, I guess.
Yeah, I think more people at least are aware of their existence, even if they still haven't kind of reached peak popularity, right?
Yeah. So like with 18xx games, Splotter games too, I think people are aware of them more. They've heard them mentioned. It's like heavy games, economic game things. Like people who are into those games talk about 18xx Splotter games a lot.
Yeah.
So they're not really overlooked anymore.
Well, I was trying to think of games that I wouldn't have said in a previous episode, or things like things that have come out in the past few years, or ones that I don't think I've mentioned in the past. You and I were talking before we actually got on Twitch today about how it seems like with party games, there's a decent group of kind of perennial favorites that have stood the test of time. Codenames is a great example, Telestrations, things of that nature. But there are a lot of really good party games that come out, get real popular for a short amount of time, and then kind of disappear completely. And there are also some party games that I think just never get popular or get as popular as I think they would be. And that could be the result of a number of things, marketing or just who's publishing it or where it gets distributed. Like obviously
timing,
I can't, right. Like it just could be any number of things. And I have a couple on my list that nobody talks about. One of which is Taskmaster, the board game, which Ambie and Joe Sondow in the chat have played with me on stream before. So Taskmaster, the board game, is based on the Taskmaster game show, and it's freaking hilarious and fun to play. And you don't have to have seen the TV show to play the game. I think it helps a little to give you context. And also anyone that I get to watch that show gets addicted immediately. So be warned. But the game is super fun and it makes your friends do silly things. And it's great as a party game. But I ordered it. I think I maybe had to order it from the UK. I don't think it's gotten distribution in the States. But I think that if they got it distribution here, I think it would be really popular. The other one that I think hasn't gotten wide popularity is called Oh Really? It's a game where you have to rank cards that are completely unrelated to one another against one another. So you have to say out of these 5 things, which one is your favorite and which one is your least favorite, but they're not in the same category at all. So you have to say like, which do you like more? Baseball or taking a nap? Like those type, like a whole bunch of random stuff that has nothing to do with each other. You put them in order 1 to 5 and you do it secretly, and all the other players now have to guess what your rankings were. So this is definitely one of those games where you kind of need to know the other players at least a little bit, although it is kind of fun when you don't know them and you have to try and guess. This is perfect for the Cards Against Humanity crowd, and I don't hear anybody talking about it. I highly recommend it if you want to play one of those games where you're kind of like doing fun stuff with your friends and you want to like poke fun at them or whatever, and you want to learn more about them. This is one of those great ones for that.
Yeah, and I have a couple party games that I liked, or that I still like a lot, that I've talked about Cross Clues a lot, but I don't hear other people talking about it. But I think that's just got like, there were a lot of party games that came out, and it came out like right before the pandemic or something. And so it's like that ones that worked better remotely got more popular, and Cross Clues does not work remotely because it's real time. And then Stay Cool also, we've both talked about, but I don't think I've really heard it talked about much otherwise.
I think the convention where it was released, the publisher like did a really good job of getting a bunch of content creators to play it at that event. And so for like a very short amount of time, everyone was talking about it. And then no one was talking about it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it's like a weird type of stress maybe, because it's like,
oh yeah,
trivia real time. So like maybe people don't play. I haven't played it as much. I played it when we first got it, but then we haven't played it really since. So I want to play it again.
I literally just played it a month ago. I don't know when before that, but I played it around 4th of July, and I am the worst when I have to tell people to flip the dang timer. Even when I can see it, it doesn't matter if it's hidden or not.
It's
Once
so
I'm
stressful.
focused on the dice, my head refuses to look up at the timer.
Yeah. And then an older party game that used to be popular, but like I haven't heard about recently is Word Slam. I was just looking through my collection basically. So Word Slam is in my collection, but like I haven't heard much about it anymore. But I think that goes into the category of like older games that are older than a few years. Even if they were really good and people talked about them a lot back then, they don't talk about them as much now, which applies to more than just party games. So like some of my other favorite games are older, like Dungeon Pets is one of my favorite games, but people don't really talk about it anymore because it's in the early 2010s or something. I don't remember when it came out, but yeah, it's like an older game, and so there's a lot of new games that people talk about.
I mean, with Word Slam, that game, in my estimation, is at its best at a convention with two giant crowds of people across the table from one another. Like, you've got one clue giver on each side, and then just a mob of people behind them trying to figure out what it is. Like, I've played it that way at a convention, and it's oodles of fun. But in a post-pandemic world, I don't know if I want to do that anymore. So, yeah, like, and that to me is where Word Slam shines, is... you can play it with a small group, but the chaos and it's more fun with more people.
I guess another game that's on my list that's also kind of not a pandemic friendly game is Witness, which is like telephone mixed. It's a cooperative like telephone like deduction clue game. So each person gets like a different part of the clue, and then you whisper it to the person next to you, and then they whisper it to the next person. So it involves like whispering in people's ears and stuff.
Yeah, when you've talked about this one in the past, I've always been like, I don't want to whisper in people's ears.
Like, you don't actually have to whisper. You can like talk quietly or like move to a different room or something. But
have you met me? Do you think I'm a quiet person, Ambie?
All right, one could do this if you weren't Crystal. Oh, another category I have on my list, because I just made a list of categories instead of games, is children's games, because, well, I don't know if I'm just finding more people talking about it now because I'm looking for them more, or if there are more people talking about it now, but a lot of times the general board game content and like media stuff is not talking about children's games as much. And like, other than the Kinderspiel des Jahres, there aren't many like awards for children's games. Like the Dice Tower Awards, they have regular game of the year and stuff, but they don't have children's game category. And does BGG have? They have family game, but not children's game, like the Golden Geek, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess in both instances, because the voter bases are less likely to consist of enough people to properly rate them.
Maybe, yeah.
But it's still a bummer, right?
Yeah. And then also because children grow up quickly, I guess, so it's harder to have like a constant children game stuff. But yeah, I am finding more places that talk about children's games, probably because I'm looking for them. Like there's some Facebook groups and stuff. So now I'm seeing a lot more of that.
A children's game that is actually on my list. It's one that I've technically only played on Board Game Geek. I've never played the physical version. I'm trying to look it up right now, but I know it's listed under a bunch of different names. Hugo is how I know it. Escape from the Hidden Castle is the, I think, original title. It was originally published in 1989, and it is a fun little, very silly game. There's a very tiny amount of skill involved. You're literally just party guests walking in circles around a party, trying not to let the ghost catch you, and you're running in and out of the rooms around the circle to try and hide from the ghost. And the ghost gets faster and faster throughout the course of the game. It is very silly, but very fun. And as the people in the Twitch chat are all noting, they're all going, Hugo! So it's silly. It's designed by Wolfgang Kramer, though, y'all. It's not like this is a nothing game. I love it. I think it's fun to play with adults who are in the right mindset. You definitely need to know what you're getting into, but we've had a lot of fun playing Hugo in the Blitz Discord.
Oh, speaking of children games designed by designers that you know, but that you haven't heard of the children's games, did you know that Matt Leacock has designed a children's game?
I did not know that. What game
Neither
is he
did I. I haven't played it, but it's a game called Mole Rats in Space for ages 7+. And I hadn't heard about it, but I saw it at our airplane museum. So we have a family pass to the airplane museum near us. And so they have a gift shop, and I like looking at the stuff they have. And sometimes they have puzzles or games or something. And they had Mole Rats in Space. I'm like, oh, I haven't heard of this game. What is it? And I looked at it and it said Matt Leacock. I'm like, whoa, what? So I guess it's like a cooperative game. Your research station has been invaded by snakes, and you have to escape the station before your bit or time runs out. I don't know much about it.
Interesting. So we've been waxing poetic throughout this episode. There's a lot of games that we can name here. I have a couple different trick-taking games on my list. Turn the Tide is a really interesting trick-taking game where you get to play the exact same hand as all of the other players throughout the course of the game. So you get dealt a hand of cards, and then that exact hand is what the player next to you will play the following round, and the hands just keep getting reset and passed to the next player. So basically everybody gets the same setup at the beginning of each round as someone else from the previous round. So there's less variability in it than most trick-taking games. It's really fun. Another one that I had never heard of until I stumbled across it on BGA was Rage, which we play in the Blitz Discord pretty frequently and I had never heard of before. It's a trick-taking game that can go up to, I want to say, 8 players, which is pretty rare. There aren't a ton of trick-taking games that go to that high of a player count and still work well. It will make you mad. Like, it's called Rage for a reason, but it's also very fun.
For my last ones, the category, I guess, is games with anime art. Some of my favorite games that I've mentioned a lot are Tragedy Looper and The Ravens of Thri Sahashri. So they're both like pretty unique games. Tragedy Looper is a 1 versus many, really heavy deduction game themed around time travel and time loops. And The Ravens of Thri Sahashri is a 2-player cooperative card game that's asymmetric and it's like pretty puzzly and thinky. But like both of them have, I think people tend to be turned off by games with anime art, even if it's not like fan service anime art, because these ones aren't the ones with fan service. And then I guess also they're kind of hard to learn games, both Tragedy Looper and The Ravens of Thri Sahashri. The rulebooks aren't great and they're hard to learn, so maybe they're kind of hard to get into, but I really like those games. And I get excited whenever I see someone else mention them because they aren't mentioned that often. So yeah, some of my favorite games, and I've mentioned them a lot, but not many other people do.
Yeah, I'm not even going to give descriptions. I'll just run through the rest of the titles on my list. Queens, To Be or Not To Be, where B is spelled like the insect. Ouch, with an exclamation mark at the end. Synchronized, Rail Pass, Last Message, Shipwreck Arcana, Adventureland, and Trellis. Those are all the games that I have on my list that I think are not talked about enough that people should check out. So if you're curious for something new, use one of those.
And that's it for this week's Board Game Blitz. Visit our website, boardgameblitz.com, for more content and links. This episode was sponsored by Grey Fox Games. 2 new small box games set in the world of Midgard are coming to Kickstarter soon. Stay tuned for updates about Clans of Midgard and Reavers of Midgard, the card game. Plus, don't forget that as a Blitzketeer, you can get 10% off your entire order at greyfoxgames.com, including promos, exclusives, and upgrades not available anywhere else by using the code BGBLITZ2023 at checkout. Join the Blitzketeer community on Discord for game nights, discussions, and more by following the link in the show notes. Support the show by leaving us a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify. And if you like us a lot and want to support us monetarily and get some cool perks, check out our Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/boardgameblitz today. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Morrow. Until next time, all the nerdy gamers, all the nerdy gamers, all the nerdy gamers, and put yourselves up. Bye, everyone. Bye. Stay tuned for updated. Stay tuned for updates, right?
Oh, sorry. Yep, that's a typo.
That's why it's underlined in Google. Okay.
Then we talk about games that we...
I just forgot the rest of the sentence. Games that we think.
Oh, no. Okay, that sentence just ended suddenly. Okay.